I still remember the cold air of the negotiation chamber on the Sovereign Wrath. It smelled like ozone and old metal, the kind of smell that told you the ship had seen many centuries and many surrenders. I was not there to surrender. I was there to give the NIGMA Empire one last chance to listen. My name is Elias Voss, commander of the Human Expeditionary Fleet. On that day, I stood alone in front of the High Cognate of NIGMA and his council of 11 advisors, each one taller than me, each one glowing faintly with the blue light of their neural crowns. They were an old empire, older than most stars humanity had ever charted. 10,000 years of expansion had taught them one lesson above all others: smaller species do not matter. I had come to prove them wrong, but not with weapons, not yet. Commander Voss, the High Cognate said, his voice carrying that strange double echo their translators always produced. You requested this meeting to discuss the Kessler Corridor. I assume you wish to apologize for your fleet's continued presence there. No, I said. I'm here to ask you to remove your blockade. That corridor belongs to no one. It is neutral space, and your ships have been stopping our cargo vessels for 6 months. A ripple of amusement passed through the council. One of the advisors, a thin figure with silver markings across her face, leaned toward the High Cognate and whispered something I couldn't hear. He smiled, if you could call it that. Their mouths didn't quite work the way ours did. Commander, humanity has held compact observer status for 10 years. 10 years, out of our 10,000. You are children, asking adults to move out of your way. Then let the adults act like it, I said. Move the blockade, or we will move it for you. The room went quiet, and then it broke into that terrible sound I had heard once before, on a diplomatic recording from the Threshold War. It was their laughter. It sounded like glass being tapped together, high and thin and utterly without warmth. You have 30 ships, Commander, the High Cognate said, wiping something like amusement from his pale eyes. We have 12,000 in this sector alone. You have no psionic network. Your ships still use physical relay towers, like a species that has not yet learned to whisper across the stars. And you threaten us? I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. This is the last time I will ask nicely, I said. You have 72 hours. He waved a long hand, and 2 guards appeared at my sides. Not to harm me. The NIGMA were far too proud for that, at least in a formal meeting, but to escort me out, the way you would walk out an insistent salesman. As I walked through the corridors of the Sovereign Wrath, I did what I always did on unfamiliar ships. I watched. I counted the exits. I noted the timing of the turret systems as they cycled through their automated patrols. I listened to the hum of their shield generators and matched it, in my head, to a frequency I had heard once before, during a routine trade visit 18 months earlier. It was the same frequency. They had not changed it, not once, in all that time. That, more than anything else, told me everything I needed to know about how the NIGMA Empire saw us. They did not think we were worth studying. They did not think we were worth changing their passwords for. They were about to learn how wrong they were. I will admit, sitting in the shuttle back to my flagship, the Meridian Dawn, I felt something close to sadness, not for myself, and not for my crew. I felt sadness for an empire that had grown so large, so old, and so certain of its own importance, that it had forgotten the most basic rule of survival: never assume the quiet ones are harmless. Humanity had learned that rule the hard way. During the Threshold War, we had been the quiet one, dismissed by 3 separate empires who thought our lack of psionics and our short lives made us weak. We survived that war, but only barely, and only because we changed the way we thought about strength. We stopped trying to match other species gun for gun, fleet for fleet. Instead, we learned to watch. We learned to wait. We learned that the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy was not a warship, it was patience. Over the following 72 hours, nothing visible happened. My fleet held its position at the edge of Kessler Corridor, exactly where it had been for 6 months. No reinforcements arrived, no new weapons were deployed. To any NIGMA scout ship watching us, it must have looked as though humanity was simply waiting to be punished for its insolence. But something else was happening, quietly, far from any sensor's notice. 2 years before that meeting, humanity had begun sending what we called cultural exchange missions into NIGMA space. Small, unarmed ships, scientists, translators, a handful of engineers, and diplomats who smiled a great deal and asked polite questions about NIGMA history and technology. The NIGMA welcomed these missions, mostly because they found them entertaining. A species with observer status, eager to learn from its betters, it fit perfectly into the story they told themselves about their own greatness. What the NIGMA never asked was why so many of those engineers requested access to routine maintenance systems, why our translators spent so much time studying the structure of NIGMA governmental communication protocols, supposedly for the purpose of improving diplomatic understanding. Why, again and again, small teams of humans were allowed into logistics centers, comm relay stations, and orbital control rooms, always under the guise of harmless cultural cooperation. The NIGMA Empire ran on a system they were deeply proud of. Every fleet, every station, every world in their territory was connected through a single, vast, quantum-linked network. It allowed instant communication across their entire empire. It allowed their commanders to coordinate perfectly, their supply chains to run without waste, and their psionic officers to sense the state of their forces at any moment, anywhere. It was, in truth, a beautiful system. It was also, we discovered, built almost entirely on trust. The NIGMA had never faced an enemy who could get close enough and stay unnoticed long enough to study that trust from the inside. They had never needed to consider what would happen if someone quiet, patient, and deeply underestimated spent 2 years learning the shape of their own greatest strength. We had. When the 72 hours ended, I gave a very simple order from the bridge of the Meridian Dawn. I did not order my ships to advance. I did not order a single weapon to fire. Instead, I gave a short command over an encrypted channel, one that reached a small number of humans scattered quietly across NIGMA territory, engineers, technicians, and diplomats who had spent 2 years building trust, learning systems, and waiting. They activated a series of dormant protocols we had spent those 2 years carefully placing inside NIGMA infrastructure. Not weapons, not bombs, nothing that could be called an act of violence in any court in the galaxy. Just quiet instructions, hidden inside routine software, waiting for a single signal. Within minutes, something strange began happening across 3 NIGMA sectors at once. Fleet coordination signals began to scatter, arriving late or not at all. Automated defense stations that had run without a single error for centuries suddenly began requesting authorization for basic functions, authorization that no longer arrived in time. Orbital shields that relied on synchronized frequencies, the very same frequencies I had noted while walking through the Sovereign Wrath, began to fall out of alignment with one another, weakening not because anyone attacked them, but because the systems keeping them synchronized had quietly stopped talking to each other. The most devastating part of our plan targeted their psionic command network. For the NIGMA, psionic communication was not just a tool, it was the very foundation of how their empire functioned. Commanders could sense the state of their fleets instantly, without delay, without error. It made them fast, coordinated, and confident. But psionic networks like theirs required trust between every node. A commander had to trust that the information reaching his mind was accurate. A fleet had to trust that the orders it received truly came from its leadership. When we introduced carefully designed disruptions into their communication relays, we were not breaking machines. We were breaking trust. And once trust breaks inside a network built entirely around it, confusion spreads faster than any weapon ever could. I watched the reports come in from my strategists throughout that first day, and I will admit, I felt no joy in it. I felt something closer to relief, and beneath that, a quiet sorrow. An empire that had ruled for 10,000 years was now unable to tell its own left hand what its right hand was doing, and not a single ship of ours had moved. For 6 hours, my fleet remained exactly where it had been. We did not attack. We did not advance into NIGMA territory. We simply waited, watching an empire slowly grind to a halt under the weight of its own confusion. It would have been easy, in that moment, to press forward and take advantage of their weakness. Many of my officers expected exactly that order. Instead, I gave a different one. I ordered every human ship to hold position and to begin broadcasting a simple message on every frequency the NIGMA used, repeated calmly, without threat. This is Commander Elias Voss of the Human Expeditionary Fleet. 72 hours ago, you were warned. This is the result of ignoring that warning. No NIGMA life has been harmed. No NIGMA world has been touched. We do not wish to destroy your empire. We wish for you to finally listen. I do not know how many of their people heard that message in those first hours, but I know that by the end of the first day, their council had no choice but to listen, because they no longer had the ability to do anything else. When I returned to the Sovereign Wrath, 26 hours after the collapse began, the ship was dark in places it had never been dark before. The proud hum of its systems had become an uneven, stuttering sound. Guards who had once escorted me out with quiet superiority now stood at their posts looking uncertain, glancing at devices that no longer gave them clear answers. The High Cognate met me in the same chamber as before. This time there was no laughter. His neural crown, once glowing with a steady, confident blue light, flickered unevenly, like a candle struggling against wind. "You did this," he said. It was not quite a question. "You were warned," I said. "We do not enjoy this. We take no pride in an empire brought low. But you called our patience weakness, and our silence ignorance. I only wanted you to understand what silence can actually mean, when it comes from a species that has learned to wait." He studied me for a long moment, and for the first time since I had met him, I saw something other than pride in his expression. I saw the shape of real fear, quickly hidden beneath layers of practiced composure. "What do you want, Commander?" "The same thing I wanted 3 days ago," I said. "Remove the blockade from Kessler Corridor, recognize it as neutral space, permanently, under terms we will draft together, and extend full compact membership to humanity, not as a favor, but as an acknowledgement of what we have already proven ourselves capable of." "And if we refuse?" I paused before answering, because I wanted him to understand that what I was about to say was not a threat. It was simply the truth. "Then your empire remains as it is right now, confused, disconnected, vulnerable to any rival who notices your weakness before you have time to repair it. We are not the only ones watching you, High Cognate. We are simply the only ones who chose patience over conquest." He was silent for a long time. Around him, his advisors exchanged glances I did not need psionics to understand. Fear does not require translation. 2 hours later, the council agreed to every term. Slowly, carefully, our engineers, the same quiet men and women who had spent 2 years building trust inside NIGMA space, began restoring the systems they had disrupted. We did not destroy anything permanently. We did not want to leave the empire broken. We wanted them to remember, clearly and without confusion, exactly how close they had come to losing everything, and exactly why. Within a week, NIGMA fleet coordination returned to normal, their shields resynchronized. Their psionic network slowly rebuilt the trust it needed to function, but something had changed permanently in the way they looked at humanity. The Kessler Corridor became neutral territory, exactly as we asked. Human cargo ships moved freely through it for the first time in 6 months. And for the first time in 10 years, humanity was granted full standing within the compact, not because we begged for it, but because an empire that had once mocked our lack of weapons had learned, in the space of a single day, precisely what we had instead. I stood on the bridge of the Meridian Dawn. As the Kessler Corridor reopened, watching the first line of human trade vessels pass safely through space that had been blocked for half a year. My crew was quiet, watching the same view, and I could feel the weight of what we had done settle over all of us. We had not fired a single weapon. We had not destroyed a single ship. We had won, if you could call it winning, by using the one thing every great empire in that region had underestimated in us: our willingness to wait, watch, and prepare long before anyone else believed it was necessary. I thought often, in the days that followed, about the High Cognate's words in that first meeting. He had called us children asking adults to move out of the way. I understood now why he believed that. Every species in the compact judged strength by the same measures: the size of a fleet, the power of a weapon, the reach of a psionic mind. By those measures, humanity would always look small. But strength has more than one shape. Ours was built from patience, from quiet observation, from a stubborn refusal to be dismissed, simply because we did not shout as loudly as everyone else in the room. The NIGMA Empire paid a price for ignoring our final warning, but it was not the price they expected. They did not lose ships, or worlds, or lives. They lost something far more valuable to an empire that had ruled unquestioned for 10,000 years: certainty. Certainty that smaller species could be dismissed without consequence. Certainty that trust, once built, could never be turned against them. As for humanity, we gained something too: not conquest, not territory beyond what was rightfully ours, but respect. The kind that is not given freely, but earned through action, and remembered long after the moment has passed. I often think back to that quiet walk through the Sovereign Wrath, counting exits and turret cycles while their council laughed behind me. They saw a soldier being escorted out of a room. What they did not see was a species that had already learned, long before that day, that the loudest warning is not the one shouted the most times. It is the one given clearly, calmly, and only once, before quietly making sure it is impossible to ignore.